Not every kitchen experiment works out, and this Indian spice Tarte Tatin, let's just say if Julia Child and my grandmother were watching, they'd both be shaking their heads and laughing. Come along as I share exactly where this ambitious dessert went sideways. You know those recipe ideas that sound brilliant in your head, but turn into absolute chaos in reality? Well, this is one of them. This is the only step that wasn't a complete disaster. This was my opportunity to infuse Indian flavors into this classic French dessert. I added garam masala and dried ginger, and they make a lovely combination with the apples. However, things did go wrong here. As you can see, I did not warm up the caramel too much, and so it was very tough to mix the butter into it. I should have raised the temperature. The spices were a lovely touch, and this would be great just poured over vanilla ice cream, but it was too thick to pour, so I had to reheat it before I could pour it into this buttered baking dish. I did make one right choice here by picking a silicone mold. I would highly recommend you do that. This is some molten ghee that I spread over the thickened caramel. What that prevents is the apples from sticking to the bottom of the tray. This is where things began to go sideways. I should have realized that a $9 gadget may not be ideal here, but oh well. First, this is a dangerous gadget. My husband and I both cut ourselves while operating it, so I wouldn't recommend buying it. I should have stuck to a regular Tarte Tatin instead of this complicated version that I've never made before. I did practice it the day before, but it was on a smaller scale and it worked just fine. Looking back, I should have stopped at this stage and adjusted, but I kept going. The sheets of apple were too thick, and so they kept breaking as I was trying to create that perfect spiral. You're only watching about a minute of this segment, but let me tell you, in reality, this took me an hour. The apples were starting to brown, and I was struggling more and more as the spiral grew in size. If I were you, I would just make a regular Tarte Tatin by peeling these apples and slicing them into quarters or eighths, and then following the steps as usual. You could see that the spiral is not even just because the strips were constantly breaking, and I was trying desperately to hold them together. If you do make make the spiral version, note that the spiral should be tight, which was quite a struggle for me, just because I couldn't get one long strip to be able to roll this as tightly as possible. I decided to just patch things together and move on to the next step. At this point in the process, I thought I was doing okay. Yes, I had made some mistakes, but I thought they were salvageable. But that's not really the case. This took 2 hours to bake in the oven, and I assume that if you cut your apples into quarters, that's how long they're going to take to bake. I made this rough puff pastry last night because it needs to rest overnight in the fridge. Honestly, it was the best pastry I've ever made. The layers, the flakiness, and the butteriness were all where they were supposed to be. I know because we ate half of this pastry the night I made it. In retrospect, I should have saved the extra pastry, so I had more room for error while making this spice Tarte Tatin. Now, this is another stage where I made a major mistake. I should have rolled the pastry thinner, and the other mistake I made was while cutting it. I should have cut the pastry to be 2 inches wider than the pan, but I don't know what I was thinking at the moment. It obviously shrank in the oven and was too small to cover the entire base of the tart. And look how thick it is. Okay, you have to watch what happens next. This was quite the disaster. The point of the step is to caramelize and form a hard shell on top of this pastry. The top actually forms the base of the entire dish and touches the apples. Wow, the pastry's on fire. I mean, it was ruined at this point, and I should have just cooked it in the oven for a little bit longer, but I was impatient. This is the third attempt, and it looks decent, but it really doesn't cover the entire base of this apple tarte tatin. Well, we've come this far, so let's move on. I was hoping that the pastry gods would help me out at this point. I knew that the construction of the tart was going to be challenging, but we'd been filming for 4 to 5 hours at this point, so I decided to just go for it. I used some scrap pastry to patch the base and help it stand up. Unsurprisingly, it didn't stay upright for too long. Those layers look good. The apple is caramelized. While I didn't absolutely nail this one, I'm pretty sure it tastes delicious, so let's give it a go.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, great job. Tastes incredible. Love the apple. Pastry is spot on. And yeah, a little bit of ice cream would just round it out perfectly.
The apples are cooked well, the pastry is really flaky. Well, if you try this at home, you don't have to make the apples spiral. You could also cut the apples into quarters and pre-roast them before adding it onto the pastry, like we did in this case, but just not in that shape, and it'll be your classic Tarte Tatin. So if you try this version or any other version of this at home, please let me know in the comments, and see you next week. If you have a sweet tooth, you'll love this next video of gulab jamun that wasn't a total disaster.